we're going to do a quick little comparison about how music was made in the past and how it was made in the present. Just know up front that we're definitely talking in generalities here. So this past process is still very much applicable in the present and vice versa. But for, I'd say, the average pop production, there was a way that it was done in the past and a way that it's currently done in the present. And that's what we're going to talk about. And at the end of this presentation, I'll explain why this is really relevant to mixing and the possibility of over mixing, how it's so easy to do that in the present. So in the past, let's say that we have a pop star diva, okay, and she is not going to be involved in the songwriting process at all. So you hire a songwriter, you might also have a lyricist, and they're probably working in conjunction to come up with the actual song. So you sit there at the piano, you write it all out, the lyricist, works it all in. You might write a little like placeholder part for a bass player, maybe something for guitar, get the chords going. And at that point, then the singer can come in and can practice using studio musicians, or if this is in more modern times even, you could use the computer to just give them something to work off of and to sing over. Very common practice. It's still done a lot today. So after the singer is really comfortable with the song, understands what it is that they're doing, what it is that they're making, maybe they've added some input, maybe they haven't, you then go into the recording studio and you record it. And at the recording studio, you have a specific recording engineer whose job it is to get the best sort of takes that they possibly can get. And let's imagine, for example, that this is being done in the digital domain. So they're recording everything onto a hard disk, into, like Pro Tools or Cubase or whatever DAW it may be, but they're not really concerned with doing a lot of effects processing. So it might be running through a preamp, running into like an audio interface or through a mixing console. But apart from that, there's not going to be a lot of additional processing, not too concerned with getting balances. The more important balance for the recording engineer is the headphone mix for the singer, getting that to a place where the singer feels comfortable. And they're just getting as good of recordings as they possibly can. They're making the decisions about microphones. But after the recording session is done, and in the recording session, it's really about speed and efficiency. Okay, you want to just make sure that you're getting the best takes without tiring out the performer. And also, you want to budget your time. Another whole day in the recording studio can be ridiculously expensive. So you've probably blocked off an amount of time and that's all you have. But after you get all those recordings, it's all gone to hard disk. You're then going to send those files off to another individual. And that is going to be the mixing engineer. And now the mixing engineer has a lot of work to do because they're going to have to clean up any of those recordings, listen for any bad takes. It's possible that the mixing engineer is going to have to comp a performance together. So maybe the recording engineer is giving you 5 different vocal takes. You're going to have to use like VocAlign and get all of those things into place, make sure everything is lining up. You're going to have to, make sure you're getting fade ins, fade outs. And then you have to go in and get all of your balances right, do all of the processing, whether that's with plugins or with hardware. You're going to have to do a lot of automation, right? Like with volume or any of your effects, you're going to have to add in like the reverbs, add in the delays. There's a lot of work that you're going to have to do as the mixing engineer until you get a mix that you think is acceptable. You send that back to the producer. The producer says whether or not they like it. You probably have to do revisions. You'll play phone tag. You'll go back and forth several times. And eventually you have a mix that they're happy with. And then that mix gets sent off to the mastering engineer who is going to get it ready for final reproduction, and then eventually out to the masses, whether that's CD or digital. Now, in the present, or I should say the way that, a pop song maybe is produced today, it works quite a bit differently. So let's say that I'm an artist and I do my own singing. All right, that's not true, but maybe in another life, that was what happened. So the first stage is kind of the same. It's sketching and composing, only now I'm doing it in a digital audio workstation, and there's a good chance that I have some kind of a template set up with drum sounds that I like, with basic instruments, and I'm really just concerned with getting an arrangement, focusing on the harmony, focusing on melody, getting that all to play together, writing out my lyrics, and then probably recording the vocal take that I'm going to end up using in the song. So after that sketching, composing stage is over, I move into the producing stage. But there's a good chance I'm not even going to open up a new project. I'm just going to replace stuff that's already on there. Maybe some of those sounds I can leave and just do a little bit of additional processing with. I bring my vocals in, I get that working, add in all of the effects, all of the transitions, and then it's sort of a matter of taste and just personal preference, how much additional processing is happening. And then once I get something that I'm happy with, I probably put it on the shelf for 2 to 3 weeks, and then I jump back into that project and I do the mixing. And now, depending on how things went in the production, I might have a lot to do here, or I might have a very little amount to actually do in that formal mixing stage. All right, I bounce out the mix that I'm happy with, and I send it off to the mastering engineer. And again, they get it ready for reproduction, whether that's on CD or digital. But you'll notice that here, same exact location, and there's a chance that I may not even have multiple projects going to make my one track. Very different from what I'm calling the past approach. So what's the reality? I'm using the words past and present. That's not a good way to say it, but for me and hopefully for you, you understand what I'm going for here. The past method still routinely happens in the present all of the time. Big labels, if you have that label business structure where you have a specific producer and everything is kind of going down this chain of command, this is still the way that it's probably going to operate. Although with the new generation and a new breed of producer like mix engineer kind of coming up, that distinction isn't as necessary. And I think for those of you using this website, what I'm calling the present is probably the way that you're working. And in the present, the distinct tasks, they aren't so distinct anymore. There's a lot of blurred lines between those three processes that I just showed you. And as I wrote, you could easily make drastic composition changes during the production. You go, you know what? I'm actually not happy with those chords. Let me just go in and change it. It's all like MIDI notes anyway, so it shouldn't be very difficult. Or you might make a production change while you're mixing. So you had this like one sweep effect that at the time you thought was really cool. You realize, no, that actually really sucks. I'm going to just replace that. In the past approach, that will happen, but it's very, very rare. In the present, fairly common, fairly simple to just go in and make a new one, something that's going to work better. Maybe for you, production and mixing are happening simultaneously. So that's what's referred to as the mix as you go or mixing along the way. And really, it is unavoidable inside of the computer and in the present approach to making music for a variety of reasons. But here we have our over mixing page, and I'm going to start with production considerations. And this is what I was just saying in the last slide. If you have to listen to a part over and over again while you're producing, you're probably going to get it the way you want, because otherwise it's going to just distract you and keep you derailed from moving forward with the production. So much different to if you're just like recording a drum kit. You know, you're getting as many recordings as you can. You're like, all right, the mix engineer is going to worry about that. But if you're producing in the computer using all virtual instruments, you're going to get the sound the way you want it or close to the way you want it. Otherwise, you're going to be completely thrown off moving forward, and nobody wants to feel that way. It's very rare for somebody to say, I'm just going to fix it in the mix later when you're working completely inside the box. The internet is probably the single biggest detractor or the thing that will encourage you the most to over-mix. And I think I said this as an earlier presentation, but a lot of the people out there who are teaching you how to mix or are going through and have like great YouTube channels or they sell tutorials, they give you so much great information, but you have to realize they might be looking at it from the different perspective, not the perspective that you're looking at it from. And a lot of times they're approaching this from the past perspective. So that's cool and it's useful, but it can very easily convince you or trick you into thinking that there's a lot more that actually has to happen in your mix than probably really does need to happen. Because if you've already spent a ton of time in producing that track and doing a lot of effects processing, there's a good chance that it's actually going to be more about restraint when it comes to mixing. So learning to say no, aka utilizing some self-control. So if you've spent a lot of time getting the sounds the way you want, there may not be a lot for you to do in the mix. And that's okay. That means that you did a really good job with the production. And this just comes down to a person by person basis in the way that you work. I know I personally, and I tried to avoid it when I was making the example track, or at least one of the example tracks for this course. I tried to avoid it and I just couldn't, because that's the way that I go about doing things. So up next, we're going to look at an example. You're not going to get to hear it, but I'm just going to show you all of the processing that's gone in and all of the tracks that were bounced in just making a simple production, and how easy it would then be to end up over mixing it. Here's our example track, and it's a track that for me personally would be very easy to overmix. And the reason it would be easy to overmix is because a ton of effects processing has already gone in here. I've gotten the sounds a way that I want them to be for that impending mix stage that is coming up. Because if I had to listen to a lot of things and know that it's not quite right, it just drives me crazy. So I go in, I add the effects processing, and I get the sound close to where I want it to be. Maybe there's some subtle things I can do with mixing in terms of separation, but for the most part, since I'm the one making the track, I know the direction it's going in, I'm going to do a lot of the effects processing at the time. And you can actually look, and what you'll notice is that this track, there's really not that many tracks going on. There's a lot of groups. When you look at it from this angle, it doesn't look like a whole lot is going on, but there's a ton of different group tracks in here, and all of them have, audio tracks attached to them, and then some of them have a lot of effects processing, some of them have very little. But one of the reasons why it looks like there's so little effects processing is because I've actually done a lot of bouncing, which just means when you're working on a track or a part, and let's say you have a virtual instrument and you've done a lot of effects processing, you can start to spike your DSP pretty quick. And so you have to bounce it to an audio file so you can turn off all of those effects. And the way I normally work and the way I normally make music is that after I've bounced something, I'll save a new version of the project. And then the old version, I'll leave that deactivated track, but in the new version, I'll delete it. So I'm basically just really, number one, saving space, and number two, fully maximizing my DSP capabilities. But if we just go in here and we look at all of the deactivated tracks, and there were some more that I just ended up deleting, you can see that a lot of work has gone in to many of these sounds, if not all of these sounds. And then it's possible that even some additional stuff has happened inside of it, inside of those audio tracks even further. So if we start with our guitar, for example, and this is just the deactivated version, you'll see how far we've gone. And I'm not going to let you listen to the actual guitar that I have in the track, since there's a chance for you to be mixing it. But if I go in here and I reactivate this and I go in and listen, we can go through and hear everything that's been done. So that's what we're starting with. All right, nothing really good. But when I go and I start to do my processing, now suddenly we have a part, there's some like dimension that's been added in. We've been able to take that guitar, put it a little bit more stereo. And then in the track, you'll actually see that when I go into that guitars group, I've even done a lot of additional processing on these different guitars. So there's a lot going on here, more than meets the eye. But when you're aware of that and you're aware of all the processing that's been done, it means that it's so easy to overmix it, thinking that you have to do more in the mix stage. But if you get a sound where you want it to be, sometimes it's better to just leave well enough alone. However, if your ear, when you listen to this track, tells you that it is not close to ready, that there's a lot that can still be done, you need to do a lot of additional processing, then by all means do it. It's such a taste thing. But be careful with your own music, especially, not to over mix it. because you've probably gotten it pretty close. If you're having to listen to a part again and again and again, if it's not right, it's going to drive you crazy. So you probably go in there and get it pretty close, which just means that there's going to be less work for you to do in the mix. That's totally fine. That's totally acceptable. So when it comes to mixing this track, I'm actually going to give you two options. One option is to mix it with all of the effects that I've already put on here. And a lot of them, they don't have any because of bounces. And then the other option is going to be to mix it with the effects that I already have on. So there's still more that can be done here. But if you want a serious challenge, you can try mixing it without any of the effects processing that I've done in the track. But remember that there still has been effects processing. It's just that these files have been bounced out. All right, so if you have any questions, definitely let me know. But for the most part, this is just used as a really simple example to see how easy it can be to overmix when you've already done quite a bit of processing in the production stage. The next question you're probably going to have when it comes to mixing is, who's mixing the track? Are you the one mixing the track? And if you are the one mixing the track, odds are you know exactly what you are going for and have made considerations during the production. True with the example that we just looked at. I know already exactly what I want that mix to sound like without even going in and doing those final adjustments to the mix. And you yourself probably don't want to be making drastic changes to what you've done in the production unless the overall vision changes when you sit down to mix. And again, we'll go over this later on, but giving yourself a couple of weeks to take a step back, it's possible you'll come back in and realize that something just isn't working and a drastic change has to be made. And if that drastic change does have to be made, you actually probably want to go back into the production phase, open up that project, and make the change there, as opposed to trying to do it in the mix. Now, when someone else is mixing, it's a little bit different because that person is bringing in a fresh perspective. So it's no longer, they don't know, unless you tell them, they don't know what's going on in your head, and they don't necessarily know the reason why maybe you've done things. And that's really cool. So I'm not going to tell you guys what it is I'm going for when you can, if you want, sit down and mix the track that I'm going to give you the stems for. You have no idea what I was going for. So you might be listening to that and thinking, why in God's name did he do that? It makes no sense. When you listen to my final mix, it might make sense to you, but you will probably take those stems and go a different direction. So with somebody else, they might also hear things that you have simply ignored, which is when you become too invested in that production. You've lost perspective on it. That's one of the reasons why people are encouraged to have somebody else mix their music. It's not just sheerly out of greed. I'm sure that's a part of it. And you know, the mixing engineers and that job, those people don't want to go out of business. But it is true. You can completely lose perspective on a track, and then you miss something and you go back and listen to it later and realize, oh my gosh, why did I do that? That happens to me with every single thing that I've ever mixed. I listen back to it a month or two later after not listening to it and realize, ooh, you know, I should have given myself some more time before going in to mix that. And when you have someone else mix, that individual may hear the track in a new light, and for that reason, they may need to process some parts a lot heavier than you ever would. And that doesn't mean it's a bad thing. It might be a good thing. It's going to make your track different from how you imagined it, but doesn't mean it's going to be any better or worse. So I kind of jumped the gun there, but is one way better than the other? Is it always smarter to have someone else mix your track, or is it okay for you to just do it? In my opinion, this is a matter of preference on a track-by-track basis and on a mixer-by-mixer basis. So who's actually mixing the track? And it could be in one instance you prefer when somebody else mixes it. In another instance, you actually are happy when you're the one sitting down and doing it. And for our course, there's only one way to find out, which is you can mix your own track and also have other people take a crack at mixing your own track. And afterwards, you can listen to the two side by side and pick what you think is the right track. You know, what sounds better to you. And it might be your version, it might be the other person's version. One thing that is always true, though, the more you practice, the better you're going to get. So whether that's mixing your own work or mixing somebody else's work, the more you sit down and do it, the more techniques you're going to develop. And, you know, the better results, what you're hearing in your head, you're going to be able to come up with. So thank you for your attention through these first three kind of word heavy presentations. From this point forward, we're going to be getting into a lot more of the technical details, and then you will be mixing some tracks. So looking forward to it.